Hope you guys have been enjoying things so far. I'm sure many of you will be wrapping up here and heading home. But before doing so, we're going to take you through some of the basics here of starting with segments in Klaviyo. Before we kick things off, how many people currently segment their lists before sending out campaigns? Okay, so most of you. So that's great. We'll dive into some more specifics here. Marissa will also show how to build some various segments in Klaviyo. We'll also cover some of the basics around just what are segments and just getting started with understanding the concept in general. Like Barack said, my name is Alex. I'm an account executive here at Klaviyo. I help new customers come on board with the platform, specifically understanding the best strategy and techniques for their businesses. And I'm here today with Marissa.
My name is Marissa Pederuti. I'm a technical writer on the Academy team. I started at Klaviyo a little bit over 3 years ago on the marketing team, actually. So yeah, we're really excited to get started. As Alex mentioned, she's going to start us off with some information on the basics of segmentation, and then we'll go into Klaviyo, and I'll show you some examples of how you can actually execute on the concepts that we'll go through earlier today. And then we'll have some time at the end for any questions that you guys have.
Perfect. Thanks, Marissa. So first things first, what is segmentation? So with segmentation, we're really looking at your list inside of Klaviyo. So this is going to be all of your customers or all of your subscribers and getting them into smaller groups, or as we call them in Klaviyo, segments. And this can really be based on a number of things. We're talking here on one hand about things that people have done with your website. So website activity, order engagement. And also we can group people into segments based on just general characteristics. So here we're saying things like where are they located or what age group are they in. And segments inside of Klaviyo can fuel a few different processes. So the three main areas where you're going to see segments come up in the platform are going to be campaigns, flows, and then just general analysis. So the first one here is campaigns. So campaigns in Klaviyo, those are those manual sends. That's where we're saying, great, we have this piece of information. Maybe it's a new product, it's a sale, it's some kind of general business announcement. You're going to craft that content, and then you're going to send it to a specific segment or segments inside of Klaviyo at a given date and time. The interesting thing about segmentation is that we've actually seen the most successful campaigns in terms of revenue be sent to those that are less than 5% of your overall list size. So we're talking here about a really, really small group of people, which in turn actually ends up really delivering more revenue than if you were to, say, blast your entire list. So before we jump into flows and analysis, since we're more of a small group here, rather than pairing off, I'd love to just kind of hear some ideas out loud. For those who raise their hands on ways that you segment today, can anyone give me some examples of, let's say, your last campaign? What different segments did you push that out to?
We have people that are subscribers but not customers.
Okay, so non-purchasers. Awesome. I know you other people are doing it.
I do a lot with just recent engagement, like depending on how frequently the brand is emailing. If it's really frequently, we'll use a smaller engaged segment. If they don't email as much, we'll use like a 90-day segment or something.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty much what we're doing, sending to more so the overall engaged group with the intention of breaking it out in smaller segments, which is what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marissa is going to cover looking at some different segments, looking at unengaged folks. We'll touch on deliverability here for just for a little bit, which kind of feeds into that same idea as well. Perfect. So the second category, the second area in Klaviyo where segments are really influential is going to be your flows. So unlike campaigns, now these are automated emails within the system. So what you're doing here is you're specifically saying when someone takes an action or becomes a part of a specific segment in this case, we want to send that person an email or a series of emails. Because the flows inside of, because the segments inside of Klaviyo update automatically, this is really great because you can do something like VIPs, for example, where you say, this group of people, they've either spent a certain dollar amount with my business or they've placed a certain number of orders. And when they finally hit that threshold, when they finally become considered a VIP, Klaviyo is going to automatically add them into that segment. And you can then use that to trigger a flow. that Flow could send out again an email or a series of emails with a thank you, maybe a special incentive or offer, or asking them to refer a friend. And then the last area here will be analysis. So analysis is using your segments not just to send emails, but also to really have a temperature check or health check on the business. This is looking at your KPIs, so those key performance indicators, understanding how quickly segments are increasing or decreasing. And you can even start to look at things like, let's take our segment of folks that are considered churn risks. So these are the people that have bought from you at some point. It's been quite a while and they're not really engaged. Let's say that group today makes up 10% of your overall list. You may decide to have a goal by the end of the year to drop that down to 5%. So we can take a look here at some real world, and I say that with a grain of salt, and you'll see why here in a moment, examples of what it's like when you actually look at your customers and their behavior prior to sending out a campaign, rather than doing the strategy of, let's just send this message out to the entire database. Anyone know who this is? I'm guessing a few of you do because you're smiling. This is Miss Piggy. So she's the star of Jim Henson's The Muppets. She was also Kermit's on-again, off-again girlfriend. For those curious, they started dating in 1978, but they broke up in 2015. So there's still hope, though. So let's imagine that Miss Piggy is a customer of yours or a prospect. She's inside of Klaviyo, but you're not really using any information around her interests, her activities, to determine the things that she may or may not like to see in her inbox. So you're a company in the food and beverage space, you decide to jump into the subscription box area, and you decide to start working on a Meet of the Month club. So maybe you end up sending it out to your whole group, and you send her something like this. Probably not so good, not something that's going to go over well, and you're going to end up really getting people turned off by your emails, feeling like the information that you're sending to them isn't relevant, isn't catered, certainly not personalized for their interests. We can look at the other side of the coin here. Anyone know who that is? Jon Snow. For those who don't, it's Jon Snow. He's one of the stars of Game of Thrones, the HBO series. And it's really all about angry kings, a lot of wine drinking, sword fights. But the main overarching theme is that they're really afraid of the winter. So the winter in Game of Thrones land can come around and it can last for some unspecified period of time, even up to several years. So now imagine that Jon Snow is in your database and you were looking at things specifically related to him and what he was browsing on your website, or even where he's located, so his geography. You may end up sending him something like this. Much more targeted, much more relevant. You're going to certainly have someone who maybe hasn't converted before clicking at the very least, if not buying on your site. And this is how you can start to increase that engagement across your customer base. So other than really disappointing Miss Piggy, there's obviously ways or reasons why you should segment today in Klaviyo. And the first is a little bit obvious, but I think one of the most important, and that's going to be your customer experience. So we're looking at people feeling, again, more heard, more understood. If you're a health brand, for example, you may be asking people, well, why are you here? Is it just general health? Is it to lose weight? Are you dealing with some kind of specific issue? And having information like that around your customer and segmenting before sending out specific notifications can really help them feel like they're understood and that your content is relevant. Now, in turn, that's going to lead to performance. So more opens, more clicks, more likelihood that people are going to be interacting and engaging with those emails on a regular basis. And that, of course, leads to the money. So more opens, more clicks, more revenue. You're going to have that increasing the amount of money that's coming in per email, and actually highly segmented campaigns tend to pull in about 3 times more revenue per recipient. And then lastly is deliverability. So those folks who are today segmenting out and actually sending more frequently to their engaged users, that is an excellent thing to do for, of course, the reasons above 1, 2, and 3, but especially for deliverability. And that's really how easy or how likely is it that your emails are actually going to make it into someone's inbox rather than getting flagged and put into the spam folder. Gmail, Yahoo, all of those email tools, what they end up doing is they say, hey, let's look at this algorithm, and it's specifically really weighted in someone's engagement with your emails. The less that people open, the less that people click, the more they start to think this might be spam, this may not be so good, and that's how you start to get into that type of trap. So no surprise here, the more folks are engaged with your emails, the less likely that a provider like Gmail is going to get suspicious and put all your hard work to waste. I'm going to pass things over now to Marissa, and she's going to take a step into Klaviyo and show you how to set some of these things up.
Cool, thanks Alex. So Alex did a great job of explaining why it's so important to be relevant, but the question you may have now is, how do I determine relevance? And what you know about your customers is really what you want to look at in terms of defining these segments. And that boils down to customer engagement and these engagement types that we like to classify into 3 categories. So we have purchase engagement, email engagement, and website engagement. And within those 3, there's a sort of hierarchy. So you have to think about purchase engagement as the highest type of interest that somebody can show in your brand. So, you know, if they're placing an order with you, that's a strong indication that they're interested in what you have to say. Email engagement, it also expresses interest. They've signed up to your newsletter list, they're opening your emails, they're clicking your emails. Maybe they haven't placed an order yet, but they're still showing some interaction with you and they're interested in what you have to say at the very least. And then website engagement is somebody browsing your site, viewing products, and that also represents sort of the lightest touch point in terms of engagement that we like to look at. And then within all of these, there are 3 more things that we like to consider. So value is one that's mostly relevant to purchase engagement. And you can say, for example, if somebody spent $5 with your brand versus $300, you want to treat those 2 people differently. And then frequency has to do with how often somebody is showing these different types of engagement. So if somebody is browsing your website once 6 months ago, or they're continuously checking your site 5 times a day, that shows a little bit more interest than the latter. And lastly, we have recency. So that's the when somebody last took a particular action. So if somebody looked at your website yesterday versus 6 months ago, it's easier to send them a more relevant, timely message if you jump on the opportunity when they actually take that action. So after defining those types of engagement, can anybody give me an example of a segment that utilizes purchase engagement as one of the main conditions? Yeah.
Like a personal work with, like one at work, or just in general?
In general is fine.
So like if somebody buys something that has a time limit for when you need to replace it, setting up like a segment for people that bought that and then having them, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that works. Another common example of a segment that would utilize purchase engagement would be, for example, like a VIP customer group. So people who have spent X amount of money in Y amount of time, something like that. We'll go through some specific examples that will show how to use each of these types of engagement. Before we dive into some concrete examples, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that every store is different, every industry is different. So you'll want to establish some benchmarks for your particular business before you get started. And you'll see where we slot in these numbers that you'll want to determine on a case-by-case basis for your unique business. What we have here is the calculation for average order value, which is your store's total revenue divided by the total number of orders. So if you don't already know that, it's super quick and easy to calculate that value, and you can go ahead and start using that in some of your segments. One more thing that's important to keep in mind before we go ahead and get started using Klaviyo to build our segments is how conditions can be joined within a segment. There are 2 main ways that you can join conditions within a segment, and that's and versus or. And is more exclusive, so that means that somebody has to meet all the conditions of the segment in order to be added to the segment. For example, if you build a segment of people who've placed an order and are on your newsletter list, somebody has to satisfy both of those conditions in order to be added. Or, on the other hand, is inclusive. So somebody only has to meet one of the conditions of the segment in order to be added. So if we take the same example and we build a segment of people who are in our newsletter list or have placed an order, that group is going to contain people who have placed an order but aren't on our newsletter list, and vice versa. So that will be a larger group of people. That's really important to keep in mind, especially when you're building segments with negative conditions. So in the example here, I'm trying to build a segment of people who are not in the US or in Canada. On the left, we have the country does not equal United States, and the country does not equal Canada. And that's the correct way to set that up, because we want to collect people who are not in the United States and are not in Canada. On the right, we have the country does not equal the United States or does not equal Canada. And the tricky thing with this is that someone can't be in two places at the same time. So if somebody's not in the United States, they can still be in Canada and vice versa. So that's one thing to keep in mind that trips a lot of people up. So what does this mean in practice? What do these segments actually look like? We're going to run through 4 common examples that our customers are utilizing, and we'll go through what each of the conditions is actually doing. The first one we're going to look at is VIP customers. Then we'll take a look at some churn risk customers, new subscribers rather, and unengaged subscribers. So the first one we'll look at is VIPs, and this is super popular. You've probably already heard about this group already. If you're wondering what you can send your VIP customers, it's great to send them sneak peeks of new products that you have coming out. It's great to run some sort of like rewards or loyalty program to really thank them for being your best customers and make them feel like you're treating them specially. You can send them discounts. You can encourage them to tag you on social media or tell their friends about their great experience with your brand. And you can set some loyalty milestones to keep them coming back. So if you started sort of get like a program up and running, you can set milestones so people can reach different tiers of VIP and so on. The first condition that we have in our VIP segment here is that somebody is in our newsletter list. And that's really important if you're intending on emailing a specific segment and you're not just using it for analytics purposes. And this just ensures that we're only sending to people who have opted in to receive emails from us. So that's the first one we have here. And the next is somebody has placed an order at least 3 times in the last 16 weeks. And this is where recency and frequency comes into play. So we're defining in this as 3 as frequent, and 16 weeks is recent. And those benchmarks are going to differ depending on what you sell. Some products have a longer buying cycle than others, so that's why it's important to determine what those are for your business before you go ahead and get started. And the last one we have here is that somebody has spent more than $300 with us. In this example, we'll say that our average order value is $100. So this is triple our average order value. And that's how we're defining our VIP customers. The next group that it's important to look at are your churn risk customers. So these are customers that you want to win back and you want to target before they actually become a lapsed customer. Some things that you can send them are incentives to come back and make a purchase, maybe a discount, coupon code, anything like that. You can give them some information on products that they may have not seen since they last made a purchase, some information on what's changed with your brand since they last bought. But if they don't respond to these emails, if they're not clicking them, they're not opening them, they're not placing an order, don't go overboard with sending them emails because that can harm your deliverability. I would recommend only sending to this group of people maybe every 6 months, depending on your results. If you have good results, you can try sending a little bit more, but typically every 6 months is a good rule of thumb. So the first condition we have in this segment is that they've placed an order at least once overall time, so they've at least shown one strong initial point of engagement with us. The next is that they have not placed an order in the last 180 days. And again, 180 days will depend on your buying cycle, but it's a good place to start for this. And then lastly, because we're going to be sending these people a re-engagement campaign, we want to ensure that they've opted in, especially since they're kind of a low engagement type group. You don't want to risk sending emails to people who aren't interested and don't want them. The next group we're going to look at is new subscribers. So this is important even just from an analytics standpoint to kind of get a sense of how your list is growing and shrinking. You can set some benchmarks around how many people are added a month and so on. So this is good for both for marketing purposes and for just analytics purposes. Some things that you can do with this segment, you can sync it with Facebook custom audiences if you're using that integration. So one really cool thing that you can do is sort of echo your welcome offers on Facebook to get another touch point with those customers and really kind of entice them to come and make their first purchase. If you are also running a welcome series, a lot of our customers like to exclude these groups from their regular campaign sends. That just ensures that they're not getting mixed messages, they're not getting a lot of emails at the same time. That kind of confuses what your main goal is. But if you don't already have a welcome series set up, definitely send to this group to give them new welcome offers so they can go on and make their first purchase. It's a super simple segment. It's just if somebody is in our newsletter list and was added in the last 30 days. 30 days is a pretty good benchmark for most people. If you have a lot of signups at once, you can make this a little bit smaller. And likewise, if you don't see a lot of volume, you can make it a little bit larger. The next group we're going to look at is unengaged subscribers. So these are customers that you don't actually want to email. And it's important to keep an eye on them so that you can either suppress them or exclude them from your campaign sends. And I can talk a little bit about the difference between these two options. So if you suppress a customer, you can no longer email them. So suppressing a group of unengaged subscribers ensures that you're never going to send them anything by accident. You're never going to reach out to somebody who's expressed that they're not interested, either passively or actively. And you're not charged for suppressed customers. So if you have them suppressed in your account, you don't have to worry about them counting towards your billing in Klaviyo. Alternatively, if you don't want to do that and you still want them to be able to trigger flows and so on, you can just exclude this group from your campaign sends. So if you do that, when you're building a campaign, you'll have the option to include or exclude certain lists and segments. Just always exclude this group from your campaign sends so that you're not emailing them. So this segment looks like this. We have somebody is in our newsletter list and was added more than 90 days ago. This was added more than 90 days ago part is really important because we don't want new subscribers who haven't had a chance to engage with us yet to fall into this segment. So we only want to get people who are added more than 90 days ago. The next condition we have here is that somebody has opened an email 0 times in the last 90 days, so they haven't opened an email in the last 90 days. And they haven't clicked an email in the last 90 days. This 90 days number is going to depend a lot upon how frequently you send to your newsletter list. So if you're sending every day, this could potentially mean that somebody is receiving 90 consecutive emails from you and not engaging with any of them. So if you're a daily sender, you definitely want to lower this number to something around 30 or 60. And this wraps up our presentation. Hopefully these segments, you guys can go ahead and start building them, start sending to them. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know.
Anybody have the first question?
Yeah.
So when we reset like to unopens, and in MailChimp, which it was really simple, just one button to do that. And is there a simpler way in Klaviyo, rather than making like a whole new segment, you're kind of adding segments I'm not going to use again into my system? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we purposely don't have that feature because we don't usually like to encourage people to send to people who haven't opened. It really depends. If you're seeing okay open rates with that group, it's probably okay. But just generally as a rule of thumb, we don't usually encourage people to send to people who haven't opened the previous email. One thing that actually has been really successful for some of our customers is sending a similar email, not the same exact email, but to a segment of people who actually did open the first one but did not purchase. And that's also something that you might want to consider syncing with like Facebook custom audiences or something to get them, on a different platform. Because maybe they're not engaged in email, but if they see you on Facebook, they could be interested. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
What are some ways that you suggest re-engaging that list that you would suppress before suppressing the list, other than like a simple, I guess frequency for like a win back?
Yeah, so if you set up your win-back campaign as a flow, you don't really have to worry about doing this. It will just run automatically. Some of our customers have what we like to call sunset flows. So when somebody falls into that lapsed customers bucket before, if you try to target them with that churn risk group, that should be right before you consider them lapsed. And then if they fall into the lapsed bucket, you can send them a flow that's kind of like, hey, do you want us to stop emailing you? If so, we won't contact you again. And sometimes people will re-opt into that email and they'll fall out of the unengaged segment. That's one tool that you could use. And a lot of times there are incentives, discounts, just to get people to re-engage.
All right, well, thank you guys. Feel free to find us afterwards too if you have any questions about your personal accounts.
Thanks, everyone.